Good afternoon. My name is Tyler Sams, and I'm happy to bring you this Bible study of the Judson Road Church of Christ, located in Longview, Texas. We're continuing a series of studies that we've begun in the Gospel of Mark. Today, our study brings us up to Mark chapter 9 and the account of the Transfiguration of Jesus. And so, if you've got your New Testaments with you, I invite you to open up to Mark chapter 9, and we'll read a little bit together, and then we'll get started in our study. Mark chapter 9 and verse 1, he was saying to them, "Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who shall not taste of death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power." And 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His garments became radiant and exceedingly white, as no launderer on earth can whiten them. And Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to answer, for they became terrified. Then a cloud formed overshadowing them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And all at once they looked around and saw no one with them any more, except Jesus only. And as they were coming down from the mountain, he gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man should rise from the dead. And they seized upon that statement, discussing with one another what rising from the dead might mean. And they began questioning him, saying, "Why is it that the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" And he said to them, "Elijah does come first and restore everything. And yet how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has indeed come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as it is written of him." So we're looking here at the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus. Verse 1 serves as kind of a segue between chapters 8 and 9. We are pressing in now towards the close of Jesus' life. And he is giving instruction here about a great event that is to take place in their lifetime. That is the coming of the kingdom. There were some, chapter 9 and verse 1, who would not die until they saw the kingdom of God come with power. So, as we think about just a practical application of that for our lives today, either the kingdom has already come, or Jesus prophesied falsely when he said there were some who were standing there that day who would not die until they saw the kingdom of God come with power. Now, immediately after that statement, we're taken 6 days later to where Jesus is taking Peter, James, and John along with him and going up to the top of a high mountain. And here, Jesus is transfigured before Peter, James, and John. We don't use that word transfigure very much. It's from the Greek, the idea being metamorphos, and that is to change into another form, often a better form. We talk about the process of metamorphosis that, for example, a caterpillar undergoes that later becomes a butterfly. So Jesus is undergoing this transfiguration, this metamorphosis, a temporary one, but nonetheless a transfiguration where his clothes, and it seems to indicate even himself, becomes radiant, like not just bright and white, but almost illuminating, as it were. His clothes become exceptionally white and bright, and there appears alongside of Jesus 2 people. We've got Elijah and Moses, and they began to speak with Jesus. Now, from what we understand of Mark's gospel account, Mark is writing primarily to a Gentile audience. And so there's a lot of things that might have a particular Jewish flavor that Mark just doesn't dwell on a lot because of the nature of his audience. However, some of the other gospel accounts record a little bit more information about this. Flip over with me, if you would, to Luke chapter 9. Look over with me to Luke chapter 9. If you look over in Luke chapter 9, you get an account here of Jesus' transfiguration from a different perspective. Here's what Luke writes about it. In verse 28, or some 8 days after these things, it came about that he took Peter, James, and John and went up to the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming. And behold, two men were talking with him, and they were Elijah and Moses. Now notice what Luke goes on to say. Who, appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So number one, they have a glorious appearance. Now, whatever that means, we're not told. We might speculate some. Do they possibly have a bright countenance, kind of like Jesus does right here? We don't know for sure. But whatever their appearance was, it's described by Luke as glorious. And they speak with Jesus about his immediate future. They speak with Jesus about what he was about to suffer and undergo in Jerusalem. And of course, knowing the rest of the story, we know exactly what that is. He's going into Jerusalem. He's going to teach. He's going to interact with people. But ultimately, he's going to Jerusalem to die. And this appears to be a moment that he shares with Elijah and Moses as they talk about that. Wouldn't it be interesting to be able to sit in on that conversation and to know what Jesus and Moses and Elijah talked about? Is it possible that they were encouraging him? Jesus is going to come and be relieved by an angel in the Garden of Gethsemane. The angels were tending to him. Is it possible Moses and Elijah are here speaking encouraging words to him? Whatever it was, they were speaking to Jesus about what he was to suffer there at Jerusalem. And while all of this is going on in Luke chapter 9, if you flip over to verse 32, kind of par for the course for the disciples, Peter, James, and John fall asleep. Corey Puckett, put your hand down. I'm not taking questions right now. Verse 32, now Peter and his companions had been overcome with sleep. But when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. So we see the disciples fall asleep later in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here they are at this seminal moment in the life of Jesus, and they're overcome with sleep. They fall asleep. They awake and they see Jesus interacting with two individuals that are identified as Elijah and Moses. And so when they wake up, Peter, not knowing what to say, says, it's good for us to be here. This is Mark chapter 9 and verses 5 and 6. Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, a kind-hearted offer, sincere, genuine, said by somebody who's speaking a bit out of turn. He doesn't know what to say. He's scared. Maybe sometimes when we're frightened and don't know what to say, maybe saying nothing is the right idea. But Peter's offer to build a tabernacle for each is rejected by God. Now, why? Why is it that Peter's sincere and kind offer would be rejected by God? Well, it seems to be that Peter was convinced that the kingdom Jesus spoke about in chapter 9 and verse 1, the kingdom of God that was coming with power, was to be an earthly one. And so if Jesus is talking about leaving and going and dying, well, that just doesn't fit the narrative that Peter has constructed in his head. And so he's going to construct 3 tabernacles, 3 dwelling places, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. You remember just a chapter earlier, chapter 8 and verse 31, when Jesus talks to the disciples about the reality that he must suffer many things, be killed, and rise the 3rd day. That doesn't sit well with Peter. And so he takes Jesus aside in verse 32 and begins to rebuke him. And this is where Jesus says in the next verse, verse 33, get behind me, Satan. Peter had missed it then. He's going to miss it again in Acts chapter 1 when the question is posed by the disciples, Lord, will you now at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? That wasn't what it was ever about. It was never about restoring Israel to physical national prominence. And so it seems kind of par for the course that Peter is missing it here as well. He's wanting to make this kingdom a physical one, when in reality, that's not at all what Jesus is working towards, and that's not at all what God had in mind. Additionally, there seems to be the incorrect idea of equality, at least some degree of equality, among the three. Let us build 3 tabernacles, one for each of you, right? That there appears to be no distinction. But then God's response from heaven is, this is my beloved Son. Listen to him. A statement we hear made elsewhere. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Hear him or listen to him. God makes Jesus very distinct from Elijah and from Moses. While there was an appropriate time to listen to Moses and to listen to Elijah, here the Son of God was with Peter and James and John. And he came for their benefit and for ours. The one to whom we are to listen today is Jesus, the Son of God. The one that the writer of the book of Hebrews would tell us has come and is the means by which God has spoken to us today. He has in these last days, the Hebrew writer says, spoken unto us by his Son. Now in Mark chapter 9 and in verse 8, after God said that, they look around, the disciples do, and they see no one with them anymore except for Jesus. It's kind of poof, and Elijah and Moses are gone. And so as they're coming down from the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man should rise from the dead. And that statement confuses the disciples. What in the world does he mean by rise from the dead? Verse 10, they seized upon that statement, discussing with one another what rising from the dead might mean. To you and to me, that seems pretty simple, doesn't it? Jesus says he's going to rise from the dead, and indeed, he's going to be crucified, and he's going to rise from the dead. So what's the big deal? But to this section of the apostles who had a misunderstanding about the kingdom, about the nature of Jesus' work, the idea that their Messiah would die was wholly unacceptable. And so they converse. Surely they're thinking that must mean something symbolic, that he must die and rise from the dead. Well, that's a symbol for something. Well, what's the symbol? Well, in verse 11, they began to question him, saying, why is it that the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus in verse 12 said to them, Elijah does come first and restore everything. And yet how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has indeed come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as it was written of him. So this leads to a discussion about Elijah, and Elijah as John the Baptist in that prophecy from the book of Malachi. You can flip over to Matthew chapter 17 and verse 13, and there Matthew records that as they are having this discussion, the disciples understood clearly that Jesus was talking about John the Baptist. This isn't some assumption on our part. This is exactly what the disciples picked up on, and they were correct in doing so. But this statement here, verse 12, he said to them, Elijah does come first and restore everything. That restore everything or restore all things is a quotation from Malachi 4 and verse 6. John the Baptist would begin the process of turning the hearts of men back to God before Messiah would come. But just because some were receptive did not mean that everyone was going to be receptive. And that's the point Jesus brings out in verse 12. And yet, how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? If John the Baptist is coming and is going to set so many things in order, how is it that after things are set in order, these bad things are still happening? Well, it's because that although John did this work of restoring all things, setting things back in order, turning the hearts of the fathers back to the children, not everyone submitted, not everyone listened, not everyone approved. What happened to John the Baptist? He was killed at the hands of ungodly men. And so just the same thing would happen to Jesus. Verse 13, I say to you that Elijah has indeed come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as it is written of him. The point being, if they were going to do that to Elijah, to John the Baptist, wouldn't they do that to the one for whom John was serving as a forerunner? There's a lot here about the transfiguration of Jesus. It certainly instills within us the importance, the singular focus on Jesus. That he is the one through whom God has spoken. He is the one to whom we must give earnest heed today. It's a lesson about making sure that our insights and that our understanding aligns with God and with his revealed word. It's a message that sometimes when we're scared and we don't know what to say, sometimes the best thing to do is to just be quiet for a moment and wait until we get a good understanding and a good picture of things. There's a lesson in here as well for us about the need for encouragement. Here are Moses, here are Elijah appearing and encouraging Jesus about what he is about to suffer. If Jesus needed encouragement there, needed encouragement in the garden from the angels that were ministering to him, don't you think we'll need encouragement sometimes too? Let's not only be the kind of people who are willing to extend that encouragement, but let's make sure that we're the kind of people who can receive and accept that encouragement as well. Thanks for joining me today in this study of the Transfiguration of Jesus. I hope you have a fantastic start to your week, and I look forward to being back with you next Sunday. Have a good day.